All right, so welcome, welcome, welcome. Um, how exciting to be here on this connection with this young lady right here. Um,
Hello, hello.
yes, so excited to have you in our spotlight today upon this connection. And for those of you that are tuning in here, I want you to know that what I know about this young lady is that she is on point. She is passionate about ministry, and she is definitely living life on purpose. And so that's our primary reason for being here today, up close and personal with this young lady in this moment. She will share with you 3 steps on how you can live life on purpose as well and when. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you mentor, life coach, and one of our very own Find Your Fit Rocks fitness professional member, Minister Debra F. Bell of P3Coaching and Consulting. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And so glad we are finally connected and sitting side by side today.
Thank you so much, Emily. I am great. Thank you for that warm introduction. I really appreciate your thoughts and sharing what you've experienced of my ministry and the things that I do. I really appreciate that. I never take it for granted that when I connect with people, no matter where it is, that I add value on some level. And that is really one of the life goals that I have.
Well, yes, ma'am, definitely. And so, we're not going to waste any time. We want to go ahead and take this journey, take us back. We want to journey, see, kind of give us some insight on the journey that you have been on for some years. So take us back to those humble beginnings and let us know about Debra, and I should say Minister Debra F. Bell. Let us know about those humble beginnings.
Okay. So I really thought about this presentation today, and I want to take you back really to how it started. Mm-hmm. A lot of beauty is birthed out of tragedy. And that's how my story started. So during a very challenging divorce, going to therapy, it was a very public divorce. So I dealt with a lot of things publicly where people were able to see and watch and observe how things were being handled. And sometimes that's additional pressure. But I'm really grateful to God that one of the things that he did for me during that time was to close my mouth. Mm-hmm. So I didn't talk about what was actually going on, only with my private circle. And so people were looking from the outside and had no idea what was really happening. But through that process, I ended up in therapy. And let me tell you, the first experience I had with therapy was that I was asked in a group, well, Debra, share with the group why you're here. And I had the nerve to say to them, I'm just going through something and I'm not going to be here long. This isn't going to take a long time for me to get through. And actually, the therapist ended up sharing why I was there.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you walked into therapy not being truthful and honest, I guess, so much with the...
I had no idea what that group experience was about. Okay. And didn't know the level of openness that was required really to get what you needed out of it. Yeah. But 2 years later, as the group and I laughed about my first experience, I gained what I needed, and what I needed and what I wanted was to be made whole. Yes. And God allowed that to happen for me through prayer, of course, in my relationship with him, but also through the work that I did in therapy. And so my counselor at the time, the therapist, was the first one who said to me, you need to consider coaching. Oh, and wow. At the time, this was in 2002, I had no idea what coaching really was. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until 4 years later that I actually began the business, P3 Coaching and Consulting.
So Debra, let's go back to that counseling circle. And
Yes.
this is why connections are so important. This is why even counseling is so important.
Oh, yes.
Who would have known when you walked into that counseling circle and service provided to you that P3 can be birthed, right?
That is where it happened. That is absolutely where it happened. And no, I had no idea. I was dealing with the trauma of what I was going through at the time. But God, again, has such an amazing way of birthing beauty out of tragedy.
Out of tragedy. And we're going to have to write that on a line here. Birthing beauty out of tragedy. So make sure we get that. That's a takeaway, definitely. If someone can type that in the chat room, we appreciate that. Birthing beauty out of tragedy. So Debra, we know that counseling is healing, and this is another takeaway, especially during the pandemic that we have been facing so many tragedies. We've lost so many friends, but what we also understand is that although we may have been through this tragedy and the pandemic, that also comes a piece of discovery. A lot of us have discovered many things during the pandemic that we had no idea that God instilled in us. So share, and we're going to talk about this a little later, but share with us during this time that you were in counseling and going through this tragedy of yours. What was that number one, I should say the number one joy that came out of it? What was that joy that came out of your counseling?
The joy that came out of counseling was the wholeness that I experienced. I'm going to be honest and say I had a part to play in the divorce. And when you have not dealt with your issues, and all of us have them, when you haven't confronted the things that cause you to act in certain ways that one does not glorify God, it may not seem hurtful or harmful, but when you are a dichotomy, you say this and you do this. Your actions don't always line up with your words. I had to deal with loss. My mother died when I was very young, and I'd never dealt with that. I had to deal with my abandonment issues. When you lose someone that close to you so young, and there's nothing there to help you handle it, issues arise, and abandonment was one of mine. And so the beauty that came out of the counseling for me was the wholeness and the freedom I experienced to really be who God created me to be.
Yes, and speaking of wholeness, and there's so many of us, we may concentrate and think about one aspect of fitness, because this ties into fitness.
Absolutely.
We may look at it as being mental or emotional, but it's much more than that. We know that it's from head to toe. It takes a toll. We have to look at the physical realm,
right?
At the social. We have to look at, even it can affect financial as well, especially going to counseling, right? So we, with Find Your Fit Box, we are focusing in on the whole body. And so we want to encompass all areas, because one particular area just won't do it. It won't maintain that balance.
Absolutely.
Won't maintain the balance. So Debra, so you were in counseling. You have your coach who poured into you, and probably many others in the circle that poured to you. So I want to know, how did the transition come, or was it before this transition come, your ministry work? Your ministry work, how did that, give us a little bit of background about your ministry work?
Okay, so I was licensed as a minister in before I got to counseling. So I was already serving at a local church, actively involved in leadership development and training. And again, as people looked on the outside, they thought, "Oh my God, you are amazing. This whole unit, everything is amazing." But the truth of the matter was, I was depressed and had been depressed for quite a while. And it wasn't until I finally said, something is wrong. There's no real joy on the inside. And then I started to receive the help that I needed. As I began to become whole, which is a process. It's not one day in and then the next day out. It's a long process, because my first bout with counseling was to deal with the trauma of divorce.
Right.
Then I had to figure out, who am I and what do I want?
Mm-hmm.
And what am I prepared to do to get it? Those are three questions that I always ask people who come into counseling, coaching with me. Who are you? What do you want? And what are you willing to do to get it? And so as I began to deal with who am I,
Mm-hmm.
then I realized the gift that God had given me to really help people who are struggling with some of the same things that I struggle with around identity and who you are, and how to find your passion and your purpose in life and live that out. And so that part of the ministry grew as I became more aware of who God created me to be and what he had given me. And it was something that I did all along, but I wasn't connected to it until I became whole, and I really took the journey inward to understand who God created me to be.
And a lot of our understanding must come first and foremost with that alignment with God. Once we get that alignment with God and receive what he has already given to us at birth, you're not going to be able to know, right, that direction.
I absolutely agree with that statement, Emily, because God is the divine architect. Mm-hmm. And if that is so, then as creator, he also designed our purpose.
That's right.
So if he's the designer, the great architect, then he is the one we have to look to figure it out.
Yes. Now, a lot of times we don't have that, might not have that relationship, or we don't even go to God sometime and ask him to direct us. And what,
sure.
So it's a matter of having that relationship and asking God. A lot of times we don't do that. We try to take care of it ourselves, right?
Right. And you know what? God is so gracious that along the way in our lives, he will send people to help us understand, to help us work it through, so that once we get to that place, then we'll see it clearly. We'll see his hand. I can look back in my life and I can see God's hand as a little girl in Sunday school. And the teacher leaves the room and says, "Debra, teach the children," because I was 5 and I could read and I knew the Bible story. So she would say, "Finish telling the kids the story and I'll be back." As a teenager, I was teaching in the senior mission Bible study. I was the teacher, but it is what God had put in me. And when I look back, I began to see the traces of how he was showing me who I was. I love to teach. That is the great joy and passion of my life. And so coaching is aligned to that, greatly aligned to that.
And guess what, Debra, and to our audience that's tuning in, is the process had already started. We have to trust the process, but this started and was given to you at a young age. And this is what we mean about trusting the process and being obedient to God and to his word, and letting him guide us and direct us.
Absolutely. But before we can trust the process, we got to understand that there is a process.
Yes. Yes.
Sometimes in our lives, we just think things are happening and we're just going along the way. And then there are these ups and these downs, these peaks and these valleys. And then sometimes it feels just stagnant in life. And I just want to help people to understand that those peaks and valleys, even the stagnant places, have purpose. That God is using that to teach you something, to allow you to step back and observe. We're not very reflective as a people because we want everything now. And one of the tools that I use for reflection is journaling. And we'll talk some more about that.
Yeah,
but it is a great place for you to begin to dissect what really is going on within. To see then how you need to act without
and to have
on the
that
outside.
Yes, and to be able to thrive.
Yes,
so,
yes.
All right, so I've always wanted to ask this question, and I, you know, this is the opportune time to ask with your ministry and all, and I'm so thankful that that you are here to share this, because someone needs to hear this today. But how were you called, or where were you called? Yeah. I always like.
I had a feeling you'd ask that question. You were going to ask that question.
Yes.
So it's an interesting story. Other people identified my calling before I did. Okay. And so even my current pastor would say to me, you are nothing but a little jackleg preacher. And he would often say, you're a preacher. And I'm like, I don't have, you're not God. I don't have to listen to that. And then there were other people around in my life that I was exposed to, another female pastor who prophesied to me the calling that God had on my life. And again, at that time, I was not equipped or ready to acknowledge it, let alone walk in it. But after my pastor had said that to me, I started avoiding him. And one day he found me. I was upstairs at our old bingo campus and doing some work. And he said, look, something's going on with you. What's wrong with you? Because he knew me very well. I said, oh, nothing's wrong with me. I wouldn't even look him in his eye. And finally, he broke me down and I started crying. And I said, I believe God has called me to preach. God has spoken to me through his word, through a series of dreams about the calling that he had placed on my life. And I never really, in my faith tradition, seen women preachers until I was an adult here in Houston, because I grew up in that environment that says women don't preach. And so faced with this calling, I didn't know what to really do with it, because to hear somebody say it is one thing, but to hear God say it to you is something else. And so one of the things my pastor said to me, because I questioned a bunch of stuff, and I started to say this statement, if I choose not. He would not even let me finish the statement. He said, if you choose not to do this and be obedient to God, you will be most miserable.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And that's what I was gonna, did the light, how people say that, did the lights go off? Did the room illuminate? Did you start crying, like this?
You know what? It was much simpler than that. I don't think I had the drama that Paul had on his road to Damascus, seeing a light and being blinded. Nothing that dramatic, but dramatic in the sense of I recognize God speaking to me specifically about what he wanted me to do. One of the dreams that I had as I was coming to this was I was in the middle of a crowd of people. And on one side were believers, and on the other side were unbelievers. And I was standing in the middle, pulling unbelievers into faith and trying to keep believers in their positions of faith. So I was that vessel in the middle, working both sides. And later on, I understood God calling me in that terms. And then, of course, there was confirmation through the word of God. And so, yeah.
Well,
that was
thank you for
that was
answering
really,
that. I've always wanted to ask, you're the first that I've asked that. So yeah, so thank you for sharing yours.
and could I say one more thing about that?
Sure.
The thing that happened after I was acknowledged my call and was allowed to preach my first sermon, my pastor would send me to different churches where there had never been a woman preacher.
Mm.
And so there would be times often when I'd come in and the deacons would just be like me mugging. And I'd be
You
all
watch them.
nervous. There
Yeah.
would be places where I couldn't stand in the pulpit to preach. They had to bring the podium down to the floor, but I would preach nonetheless.
Yes.
And out of those scenarios, God would always allow other women to see the example and go to their pastors to acknowledge that God had called them. But then the men at the end of my preachment would always say to me, keep on preaching. God has really called you.
Mm-hmm.
So God
Actually,
confirms and he affirms.
Yes. And I, of course, I've witnessed a lot of your preaching at our church. So you're remarkable, and you still are remarkable.
God bless you.
And have really inspired many through your word, through the word.
God bless you.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for answering the call.
Oh, God bless you.
For answering the call.
Look. I'm gonna go back to Mississippi with this language. I ain't have no choice. We always have a choice, but
right.
I would rather walk in obedience than to be in disobedience to God.
Right. Most definitely. And so here you are, Debra. You have journeyed quite well. You are living that fulfilled life, and we want you to be able to share this, which you are sharing, but we want you to share this with our network, Find Your Fit Ross, with the ladies and the gentlemen here in this group, because that's what we're all about in Find Your Fit Ross. We're all about empowering our members through partnerships and connections.
Yes.
And so you do have, with your P3 coaching and consulting services, we would like for you to share with us, how can you help our members? Because I'm telling you, people are hurting, people are stuck, people just don't know what direction to go in right now. Not only from the pandemic has only exacerbated some things, but how can you help our members to get to that destination where God wants them to be? But for right now, share with us what you have.
Okay, so through P3 Coaching and Consulting, part of what I offer is, of course, the one-on-one coaching. I operate a mentoring group for women over 50 called Powerful Over 50. Then, of course, I do workshops and events that you'll see more about. I have published my first journal, is Discovery Journal, and it was birthed out of this season. I talked about reflection and how we don't often do that. The very first question in the journal is, who am I now? We've been through a lot and we're still standing. And for some people, that's a victory, but some people don't see the victory in it. And so when you take time to step back and assess and think about, process what has happened to you and who are you now? What strength did you gain? What things did you release? What things did you take on? And what things do you need to keep in order to continue your journey? You talked about 3 things you mentioned that I talk about to help people. One of them is, I truly believe, and it's a part of my coaching platform, is that you need to gain clarity before you can move forward. You need to be clear on who you are. Identity is so important, and it's imperative. Before you can understand purpose, you got to understand who you are, your identity. That's pivotal. The second thing, once you have clarity, then you need to investigate purpose. It is important that you begin to take a look back because your purpose is already at work in you. It's not going to be something that's like brand new, but you, through the help of coaching, you can bring a light to shine and pinpoint clearly what that purpose is. And if you're, for the people who are like me, I'm good at a whole bunch of stuff. And I do a lot of stuff. And my friends used to say, oh, you're just all over the place. But what I understood is that God gave me the capacity to do the things that he assigned my hands to do. And yeah, there are times when I take on stuff that's not assigned.
We all do that.
And that becomes
Yay.
clear. He makes that clear. But so that makes it harder to pinpoint purpose. But what I identify is all of the things that I'm connected to now have a line that connects all of them together. And so the coaching, the powerful group, I do a podcast, the writing, all of it is connected toward teaching, training, and developing, uplifting people.
And what's the, excuse me, Deborah, what's the name of your podcast?
The podcast title, It's Real Life Podcast.
Okay, all right.
A lot of people will look up Real Life Podcast. No, it's Real Life Podcast. And it's Debra Bell and Chris Davis. And right now we're in the middle of a series focused toward helping people in this pandemic. We're talking with leaders who've gone through distressing times about how they made it through. So hope for troubled times. So that's the focus.
And we can find that on anywhere you can get.
On all of the platforms, okay. Anchor.fm, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify.
Okay, good. All right. And
yes.
Last, now we know we have to gain that clarity. We investigate purpose and the last and final step in order for us to win.
I'm so glad you remembered.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
One more step, sister.
So the last step is implement the process. There is a process that God will give to you as you begin to walk in your purpose. And it sounds unbelievable to some people that God gives you a process. But in my life, that has definitely happened.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Deborah. We're looking forward to coming back, having you to return. And definitely we're going to apply some principles. We're going to have your journal on hand, your discovery journal on hand with us when we do have you to come back and return. So
yes, ma'am.
I want everyone to stay connected with you and with Find Your Fit Rocks. And I'm excited. So stay tuned. And we are thankful that we have connected. I'm so thankful that we crossed paths years ago, but most definitely thankful that we actually had an opportunity to sit down together for you to share your passion and how you can help Find Your Fit Rocks and other attendees on living life on purpose and living life to win in all areas of fitness, not just physical, but in all areas of personal health. Thank you so much for today. Stay tuned, all attendees, because much more is to come with this beautiful lady right here, Minister Debra F. Bell of P3 Coaching and Consulting. Have a blessed day, and until then, remain on path.